What sets the United States apart from other nations on the earth? Is it the concentration of wealth, or the prevalence of poverty, the peace and quiet, or the violence? Perhaps it's all of the above. However, there is something more. What truly distinguishes the US is its unique ability to police the world as it sees fit, regardless of the cost. Is America pushing its democracy to a breaking point by doing so? In this new series from CGTN, we delve into some of America's long-standing issues and their impact on the world. The 4th of July 2022. It should have been a day for Americans to celebrate with family and friends. Instead, it was marred by a mass shooting that left the entire population physically and mentally scarred.
This should never have happened. We talk about it being senseless. It is senseless. It is absolutely senseless.
That day, 21-year-old Robert E. Crimo III opened fire on an Independence Day parade in Highland Park in suburban Chicago, leaving 7 people dead.
I don't know if adrenaline kicked in, I have no idea, but I jumped up. I stood in front of my cousin with my back to where the shooter was. I didn't know at this point she'd been shot. I thought she had had a heart attack or fainted in fear. But my daughter jumped up at that point. We both checked for a pulse. There was no pulse.
According to the Gun Violence Archive, on that same day, July the 4th, 2022, shootings were reported in nearly every US state. At least 220 people were killed and 570 others wounded.
In recent days, there's been reason to think that this country is moving backward, that freedom is being reduced, that rights we assumed were protected are no longer.
In Chicago, Crimo fired more than 80 rounds. The authorities later reported that the killer owned 5 firearms, including 2 assault rifles. All had been legally bought. Yet in the previous 3 years, he had twice been visited by police after attempting suicide and even threatening to commit mass murder. One of the most controversial issues in the United States today is who should be permitted to own guns and what kind. The Democrats broadly support strict background checks on gun buyers to verify any criminal record and their mental health. In many gun stores, such checks are strictly enforced.
I don't know what the computer enrichment does specifically. It has nothing to do, I don't think it has anything to do with your credit report. It's more your criminal background. I know I put the information in there, I hit enter, I wait 20 seconds, I look at it, if it's approved, you're good to go.
However, it's estimated that in at least 40% of cases, guns are sold without any investigation into the purchaser's background.
It takes a lot of practice.
Federal law requires licensed gun dealers to carry out checks. But in most states, guns are available from unlicensed sellers, sold online, at gun shows, at flea markets, and through private arrangements, making it impossible to enforce checks. This is the so-called gun sale loophole.
You could be somebody who has a felony conviction, who has been convicted of domestic violence, who is a fugitive from the law, who is in the country illegally. If you're in one of these categories, in many states, you can buy a gun from a private seller without going through a background check. That's a big loophole, and it's something that a lot of policymakers and advocates are really putting a lot of it focus on closing.
A lot of people out there, whether they're selling online, whether they're selling at gun shows, who claim to not be in the business and therefore not required to run background checks. And millions of guns are being sold that way.
In most states, if you want to buy a gun from somebody who's just a private individual, maybe selling from his private collection, you do not need to undergo a background check.
Nobody can say how Crimo managed to pass a background check, but it may not be that important anyway. After all, the fact is that in the United States, the country with more firearms in the hands of citizens than any other, if you really want a gun, you can get one.
The number of guns manufactured in this country tripled over the last 20 years. Today, we have more guns in our nation than people.
Each year, gun violence in the US results in tens of thousands of deaths. In 2022 alone, the figure was 40,000, with almost 40,000 other people being wounded. Yet, despite the spiraling number of deaths and injuries, a consensus on effective gun laws remains elusive, and the nation is more divided than ever on the issue.
This is a gun country. It's crazy. We're the most armed country in world history, and we're one of the least safest. So, you know, until Americans decide that they want to give up the guns and give up the opportunity to get guns, we're going to have this problem.
Most countries have little difficulty in deciding between allowing the private ownership of guns or not. Yet, for the US gun lobby, the right to bear arms is unquestionable. Led by the National Rifle Association, the numerous gun rights organizations enjoy broad public support.
It's not about guns, it's about freedom.
David Keene is the former chairman of the National Rifle Association, the most influential gun rights advocacy group in the United States. The NRA argues that the right to bear arms is enshrined in the Second Amendment.
Our mission statement is to protect the Second Amendment and the rights of Americans to keep and bear arms, which is guaranteed in the Second Amendment of the Constitution.
The Second Amendment, adopted in 1791, is a constitutional guarantee of the right of Americans to own and bear arms. This is the principle on which the National Rifle Association is founded, and is on clear display at the entrance of the National Firearms Museum.
The Second Amendment in full, the text is a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now that's in the Bill of Rights, so it's a constitutional guarantee that everybody has.
But in recent years, as gun violence has grown out of control, the interpretation of the Second Amendment and its protection of gun ownership has become a matter of debate where neither side could win.
But unless the makeup of the Supreme Court is changed, the presumption now in this country legally is that I have a right to a gun, and that if the government wants to deny me that right, they better have a pretty good reason for doing so.
Gun control groups accuse the gun lobby, including the NRA, of being motivated by protecting not only the Second Amendment, but also their own political and social influence.
So for American politicians, one of the most important goals is to make sure that they get reelected. The National Rifle Association is organized in such a way that they have voters in every congressional district, and they're organized in every congressional district and in every state. And they're willing to show up at the meetings that politicians hold with their constituents. They're willing to vote solely on this issue.
We send to our members a little orange card that grades their candidates. And our members and the people that look to us for leadership trust us. And they say, if this fellow is somebody who supports the Second Amendment, we'll vote for him. And if he doesn't support the Second Amendment, we won't.
In the highly complex US electoral system, the NRA's tactics are simple but effective.
NRA's 5 million members and America's 100 million gun owners will not back down, not now, not ever. I assure you that.
Amid a seemingly endless debate, the American public is becoming increasingly despondent about finding a resolution to the gun control issue. In the US, a mass shooting is defined as one in which 4 or more people are shot or killed. Gun Violence Archive statistics show that in 2014, there were 273 mass shootings, a figure that had more than doubled by 2022 to 647. So frequent are mass shootings these days that most are ignored by the media. Only those that take place on campuses and involve dozens of deaths are deemed worth reporting. About a decade ago, a young man shot his way into Sandy Hook Elementary School in Connecticut and killed 20 children.
I could hear it in person, very loud and very clearly, and it was like we knew that it was close. It was definitely a lot more frightening because we always thought that it was going to be us next. After, like, when the round of shooting stops, it was like, oh, it's going to be us next.
Also receiving word that they
Then US President Barack Obama was prompted to deliver a moving speech, promising to take decisive action to end such tragedies.
And we're going to have to come together and take meaningful action to prevent more tragedies like this, regardless of the politics.
But towards the end of his presidency, Obama had to admit defeat.
If you ask me where has been the one area where I feel that I've been most frustrated and most stymied, it is the fact that the United States of America is the one advanced nation on earth in which we do not have sufficient common sense gun safety laws, even in the face of repeated mass killings.
Just as the mass shooting in Sandy Hook in 2012 was beginning to fade from people's memories, reality struck again. On May 24, 2022, an 18-year-old called Salvador Ramo entered Robb Elementary School in Texas and killed 19 children and 2 teachers. It was the deadliest school shooting in the US since Sandy Hook.
I would pick him up at the school drop-off at his grandma's house at 4 o'clock after school. But that day, no more.
Police on the scene waited over an hour before entering the classroom and engaging the shooter.
And the people kept saying, go in there, get him, go in there, get him. Every minute, he kills somebody. Every moment, boom, every moment. And they're like, nobody want to get hurt. They don't want to get hurt. So they don't want to go in because they don't want to get hurt. The children didn't have to die.
But if we need a simple phrase to describe what the report says, again, I would tell you multiple systemic failures.
The chairman of the investigation committee failed to explain the multiple systemic failures in detail, but a study of the law enforcement system and its history reveals that one of the failures is a little-known but deep-rooted concept.
My name is Joseph Lozito. I'm an assistant treasurer at David Geffen Hall Box Office at Lincoln Center. And on February 12, 2011, the New York media dubbed me the New York Subway Hero.
On February the 12th, 2011, Joseph Lozito, who was 40 years old at the time, was caught up in a killing spree on the New York City subway.
I almost died that day. It was probably about 8:45 in the morning, and I had just arrived at Penn Station. I sat down in the first car, right behind where the engineer is. 2 police officers got on the subway, and normally when police ride the subway here, they stay in the car. They usually stand by the doors when they're going station to station. This day, they went in with the engineer, which seemed odd, but I didn't really give it much thought. As we start going, a man just appears from my left. He goes to the door, he bangs on the door to get to the engineer's compartment, and he says, "Let me in." And on the other side of the door is Officer Terrence Howell. Terrence Howell says, "Who are you?"
By the time he encountered Lozito, Gelman was already being hunted by police, suspected of 4 killings.
NYPD gets a 911 tip that Gelman is on the subway in Manhattan.
People were running and screaming and saying, "Get to the back of the train, get to the back of the train."
Terrence Howell says, "Who are you?" The man says, "I'm the police." Terrence Howell says, "You're not the police." Doesn't let him in, doesn't open the door.
Howell was one of the 2 policemen who confronted Gelman on the subway. At the critical moment, however, they chose to protect themselves.
Terrence Howell knew full well he was talking to Maxim Gelman, the man he was there to arrest. Didn't do anything, didn't come out, did nothing, saved his own hide by staying in there, jeopardizing a subway full of innocent people. He chose not to do his job that day. He chose to save himself.
Unable to get into the operator's room, Gelman turned and lunged at Lozito.
He reaches in his jacket, he pulls out an 8-inch knife, looks me in the eye, and says, "You're gonna die, you're gonna die." And he takes the knife and he plunges it right into my face here. He brought his arm back to stab me again, and I had lunged at him. And while I had my arms wrapped around him, that's when he was stabbing me in the head. I'm hearing him going, The 3rd time he tried to stab me, I was able to grab his wrist. I slammed it down, the knife popped out.
As soon as Gelman lost his knife, the 2 policemen acted.
And right then and there, and only then and there, the police emerged from the engineer's compartment and they tapped me on the shoulder and they said, "You can get up now, we got him."
Lozito survived. Enraged by the lack of action on the part of the 2 police officers at the scene, he filed a lawsuit for negligence against the NYPD. But his case got nowhere.
Didn't get the chance to go to court because of the whole, they don't owe a duty to protect the individuals. They owe a duty to protect, I guess, the group as a whole, or in this case, the NYPD has a duty to protect the city, I guess, at large, as opposed to protecting individuals.
What prevented Lozito from getting to court was something called the public duty doctrine.
Basically what it says is that you can't bring a lawsuit against law enforcement if they fail to prevent a crime against you.
And what that means in a nutshell is that the government employees owe a duty to the general public, but not to one individual person.
According to the public duty doctrine, the police are only responsible for the safety of the public in general, but not that of an individual, unless a so-called special relationship is established.
So what constitutes a special relationship is certainly not clear by law. So as far as I'm concerned, that's really an exception without real meaning or teeth. Even though everyone in America and probably around the world thinks that, the police are there to help you and to provide and protect and to serve you. And they are, but only when they say they're ready to do those things. Not necessarily when you call them.
This may explain why the police officers who waited for over an hour before confronting the shooter at Robb Elementary School faced no legal sanction. It may also be a reason why Lozito and millions of other Americans choose to own a gun.
I never take the presence of law enforcement as something that would make me feel safer anymore.
We are always taught that if you have trouble, you call the fire department or the police, you know, certainly for a 911 situation. When 911 doesn't respond, what are you supposed to do?
According to a 2021 study by the University of Chicago, 46% of American households own at least one firearm. This equates to over 80 million Americans whose decision to own a gun suggests that they think the system that's supposed to protect them is actually not working.
I may be biased, but the justice system, to me, is a joke.